What am I going to do when I am overwhelmed, Jennifer?
I'm trying, before we started actually recording, you were showing me all of your lists and like in front of you and behind you and just all around you. And then can't even imagine what's all going on in your head right now. And what I find about to-do lists is that they're self-perpetuating. You put one thing down and then you'll think of the next thing and the next thing and the next thing that just keeps accumulating, which only enhances the effect of the to-do list. And the thing is, like, it's almost like a psychological manipulation because it's like you start programming yourself about all the things to do. Once you start writing it down, putting it on paper, sometimes it's nice to park it, have it anchored, and then you go through your list. Not such a bad thing. But then, like I said, you just keep adding to it, adding to it, adding to it. And then there's so much output and not enough input. And sometimes we don't even have the output because we only have the list and not the things accomplished, right? Is that sound about right?
Sounds about right. I do have two tricks that I want to share with our
Mm-hmm.
audience. One of them is I cheated on these lists. For the last
Mm-hmm.
40 minutes before I met you, I was listening to music, and I love acoustic music on my beautiful speakers. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even want to look at these lists. And I was switching off and I played amazing music. But what I do in the mornings when I don't want to look at these lists and more, sometimes I look at them for 5 minutes and I pick 3 or 5 things for the day.
Hmm.
And then I
Even
get
that's a lot.
get those done. And
Yeah.
obviously then they don't go away, but
Mm-hmm.
at least they do not put pressure on me, the massive long lists.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, right? It's really the pressure that we're feeling and the scattered and the overwhelm. We go into this fog, we actually go numb, right? And we start reacting to life instead of actually embodying it. And you'll hear a lot of like time management experts really talk about, know your priorities, know your values, line it up with that, go through those to-do lists, and anything that's like really, really important, you assign an A to, and then a B to, and then a C to in order of importance. And then you go through your A list and don't go to your B list until you're done your A list. Some will say do your feared tasks first, like the biggest thing to do that. And then there's also people who talk about the one thing, right? What is the one thing that you can do that makes everything else unnecessarily irrelevant? Or you hear about the 80 and the 20, right? What's the one thing I can do to get, feel like you've gotten 80% of that accomplished, but with very little effort? So here's the other way of looking at it. What if you, Andra, would to create a to be list? What would that look like right now? What would be the number one thing on your to be list?
Well, I'm here to changing minds, changing lives. Then that's where I prioritize. I do show up for my clients, for my podcast, and I do what I love. These things on the list, unless they
Yeah.
have specific, really tight deadlines, I don't worry about much.
Right. And those are still things to do. So what kind of person do you need to be? Who is the Andra that shows up in those things, in changing minds, changing lives? Who is that person?
I'm
How
here
are
to
you showing up?
I'm here to contribute, and I
Yeah.
enjoy what I do. And things will
Yeah.
at one point in the future.
Yeah. So you're being in that space of contribution and enjoyment and in service, right? So these are your values that are speaking through that. And this is what matters. And when we start, like you said, doing the things that you love and doing the things that are true for you and that feel authentic and that feel aligned, then that's where you start gaining that momentum. That's where you start feeling alive. That's where it feels expansive and free and liberated because you're doing what you're meant to be. You're being who you're meant to be. That's what's the most important thing ever, right? And you may or may not ever get through all of those to-do lists, but knowing that, what brings you enjoyment, that feeling of contribution, the feeling of being in service, that's where you focus on. And maybe those are the 3 to 5 things that shine out to you that kind of are spotlighted when you look at the long list. Those are the things that's like, yeah, I want to do that. It's important too to go on our growth edge, right? Like the things that we fear. Notice what we're avoiding and escaping, because those things are draining our energy, right? Because of that resistance. Resistance is tight, it's limiting, it falls into that space of not doing and avoiding and escaping, and kind of those defense mechanisms. Those defense mechanisms are helpful for a short time. They're not meant to be long-term solutions, right? And so focusing more on who you're being, how you're showing up, how you're feeling, so that you can start building that momentum, so you can sustain the well-being and sustain your focus and your drive and your actual passion, right? I think we spoke about passion before. I'm always talking about passion being the pass I on, that I, that is your soul's expression of what you're here to pass on in this lifetime. So that's you, Andrea, showing up in your potency on what's the most important thing, the most contribution that you can make, the best way that you can be in service. But here's the thing, it's not just into your business and to everybody else, it's also how you're being in service to yourself. Where's that self-love? What are you basing your self-worth on? Right? Because sometimes that to-do list is like ego grasping, I got to get this done, I got to get that done. And you get this obsessive compulsive pattern going on. And that's not a healing space to be in, right? That's just continual hamster wheel kind of mentality, right? Of going on to the next thing, going on to the next thing, going on to the next thing. We all have the same 24 hours in a day. So how are we going to best use that? More importantly, how do we want to be? What do we want to be experiencing in those 24 hours? And making sure that we have the time, energy, and presence to be able to engage in that.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. And for the audience, there's no one answer. We have thrown up a few ways to deal, especially Jennifer, you have shared quite a few ways to deal with the list, the to-do list, with the overwhelm. You know what? Choose one and see if it works for you. If it doesn't, don't get stuck. Do something different. And maybe even you could have 2 different strategies for the weekends and 1 for the weekdays. So I think flexibility and working out your own best ways to cope is the way to go. Thanks very much, and share what you've learned from this video, and see you soon.